So before I get into the video, really, I'm going to say this is a combined review. I'm going to go over the core book, of course, but I'm also going to go over the modules I have for the system. Because I feel like, well, there's so few modules, and I feel like the products they put out for an RPG line after the core book is very important to that RPG. So I'm going to be reviewing those as well after the core book. I'll be the ones I have and I'm going to review are Pearl at King's Landing, Wedding Night, Chronicle Starter, and Dragon's Horde. So the system itself is relatively easy. You have ability ranks and bonus dice. Ability ranks go through 1 through 7, and they range from, most people start with 2, but you can go up to 7, which is like legendary on your on the continent level. Like you're some of the best on that level. But regardless, so say you have an ability rank 3 in fighting, just general melee fighting, and then you have a specialty in swords, 2d6 specialty in swords. So when you combine them together, you roll 5d6 instead of just 3d6. Wow, basic math. Slow down, Satan. So these guys, the bonus dice help improve your odds. Because bonus dice, when you roll them all, you take the best 3. You take the best out of your ability rank. So that way you get a bit more better odds because you get the best 3 instead of just all of them. So that way, because actually going over the defense or the difficulty rank for a skill roll actually helps you do it with degrees of success, and those give you more damage for combat, for example, and help you do more things than you set out to do initially. But overall, that's really the gist of the system. It's pretty simple. You just roll, you just count the numbers, the actual numbers on the dice, on your best, how many ever dice you get out of a roll for your total result. And it's not just like, oh, 4 through 6 is a success, 1, 2, 3 successes is what you get. It's a bit more than just that. But unlike Exalted, character creation is more complex, more simple. There we go. It's more simple than Exalted. There are still a few steps. Age actually matters in this system for like how much experience you start off with, which is nice. But the first thing you go over is the house creation, and you make a house, and it's honestly the best part of this system. It's just making a noble house, and it's pretty bad. It's front end heavy on what I like the most. It says when you go into character creation, that chapter, it says, okay, now go to chapter 6, I believe, for making an actual noble house. You'll have to expect this kind of page referencing. It's a little wonky. It does the, words are hard. The character creation, it says go to this house, but then, like for other things, like it doesn't happen too often, thank God, otherwise it'd be a fucking mess. But like, for example, I vividly remember the stats for equipment being in one chapter, on one page, and then the actual price for those weapons on a completely different area. Luckily, it only does this 2 or 3 times, really, throughout the whole book, but it's pretty bad overall, I think, to have that. It's like for things you'd reference, not frequently, but often enough to be irked by such page referencing. The house creation, the noble house in Game of Thrones, is the reason your characters really stay together. It's a common ground between nobility, servants, knights, assassins, what have you. It's the whole reason to make your party be a cohesive unit and work to the betterment of their noble house. very rarely will you actually find a reason to, oh, you guys all met in a tavern, now you're going to start risking your lives for each other, for strangers. You guys can all be family members. Characters can also be parents if they so desire, and other players be like their kids, or it could be a noble heir and then the servants of the actual house. It sounds kind of constrictive, especially when you say noble, like family. It sounds like you'll all be related to each other, but not necessarily, thankfully. So there's a lot of leeway for that. And honestly, because of that reason, and creating a house is just so fun, it again is really my favorite part of the system. I have actually gone and just rolled houses just because it's fun and I like it. I've never like used them for anything except my own enjoyment. So there is that. So when you do actually roll for your house, you can like decide what region you're in. That region gives you like a baseline stats for like wealth and power and like how much land that house has within that region. So you roll all of these stats like as a group, and you get like little bonuses depending on how many people you have. But it already is just more just like to bring the group together to then make it as a group instead of just like, oh, I make this house, here you go, says the DM. So you get resources and other things that like actually have bearing influence. For one, it has a lot of bearing on like your individual character's status. So that's like probably the most important one for character creation next. Otherwise, the steps for making a house are very clear. It's actually really fun, I think, to roll up a house again. The probably the hardest part about this is doing the fluffy bit, making your coat of arms, making your historic events like mold your house's reputation in the current day, and then your house motto. I feel the going online to the wiki of Ice and Fire is really helpful. There's plenty of just throwaway houses that Martin has made and just mentioned in passing that will never get any sort of depth. So I feel like stealing from them liberally is justifiable, especially if they have a cool coat of arms and a motto that you want to like take and make as your own. I also have the World of Ice and Fire. This is actually an in-universe, book that your character can actually pick up in the game itself. So you can actually learn a lot just out in the IRL. You can learn a lot about the setting. Each of the kingdoms I think are really fun about Essos and other places, but you can actually just your character can actually just pick up this book and say, I start reading The World of Ice and Fire. And I think it's just really a cool kind of like prop thing to do. But it is also really helpful on making your house as well. And also, actual medieval history, coats of arms, and mottos can also be found online just very easily. Just Google searches. I'm sure just normal Wikipedia has plenty of that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of resources you can pull for to help you with like the fluffy bits of making a noble house. So now that you have this, what does it mean exactly? Resources for your noble house can be fairly abstract if you don't do house actions. House actions and house fortune rolls are two things you can do every in-game month. Good and bad things come from these depending on the role, and you can just kind of spin out how you will as a DM does. Every month you can take an action, which include hosting a tournament, having a wedding, waging a war. You have plenty of things to do in your spare time, as well as whatever adventure your DM throws at you. You know how I said to reference things from other chapters earlier in the video? This is one of those examples where Chapter 6 has the table results for House Fortune rolls, but what each one does is explained on page 212 of chapter 11. So, yeah. Alright, now we're finally on to character creation. Woo! So, unlike other RPGs, your age matters in Song of Ice and Fire. It affects your starting experience and your destiny points, both very important things. Table 3.8 shows how much experience each age group gets, and the max starting rank they can have outside status. It also shows how much you have to spend to gain new ranks in each ability. The first thing you need to spend experience points on is your status, and that's influenced by your influence rank during during house creation. Every ability starts at 2, no matter what the age. To level it to rank 3, you have to spend 10 experience points. After that, each rank is about 30. Table 3.9 shows each of the age group specialty experience to spend specifically on bonus dice. Remember, the bonus dice cannot go above their respective ability rank. So Destiny points are a metagame currency you can spend for mechanical or story benefits, like, GM, please don't kill me. There are 2 ways to use Destiny points. One is spending, the second is burning. Spending gives temporary boosts, while burning gives major story benefits, like avoiding certain death, as I said. Spent Destiny points can be recovered next session, while burnt Destiny points are gone forever. Destiny points can be acquired through play, like at the end of an arc or a season, as it would be for Game of Thrones. So it's not like you'll never see them again. But Destiny points are also spent on qualities during character creation. Qualities are like feats from Dungeons & Dragons, something to give yourself a bit more customization for your character to stand out from the crowd. The counter to qualities is drawbacks, which grant you more Destiny points. So the more drawbacks you have, the more Destiny points you can start with. But, of course, I think even the book has an example of you don't want to be a blind, mute, crippled old man who has then amazing qualities because he got so many Destiny points, because he took so many drawbacks. There's a limit to how much it makes sense, so have fun with that. Lastly, equipment and derived statistics are the last thing you have to fill out for your character. Now it's time to get down and dirty with the actual review of the systems involved with this setting. So, combat and intrigue. These are the essentials of the Game of Thrones setting. This is where I believe the developers didn't playtest as much as they could have when it comes to combat and political intrigue. It really feels like they made their character creation system first, and then this combat second. Combat and intrigue are basically the same thing, mechanically. And if you need help wrapping your head around the intrigue system, which is just different ways of talking at each other, I recommend the Gentleman Gamer's review of the subject. He helped me understand it much better, and I honestly wish I had found his video when I was first DMing this, because political intrigue was really weird when I was doing it at first. What really hurts these systems is the degrees of success. They give multipliers to the damage you deal, with a max of a ×4 multiplier. The damage multipliers aren't bad in of themselves until you deal with a min-maxing character. I've had 2 different characters break the system without really trying anything. It was very easy to just go in and just roll a bucket full of dice and stomp on anything, basically. There was one that was an archer who bought a quality that let him break the rank cap 7. So he got his archery up to 11, and he pretty much shot everything within probably about a mile, is what I capped him at, and he could accurately shoot within that range, and most things he shot died, if not in one, in two shots, just because he was just that fucking strong. He was rolling that many numbers, it didn't really matter what it was he was shooting, he could kill it. Another character, this one did not break the cap. He just got the 7 in the fighting rank, and a 6 bonus dice in the double two-handed great swords. He was able to cut enemies in half like it was a fucking anime. At one point, at the end of the campaign, I was just like, fuck it. Once you cut him in half, there's this big of wind, and who put anime in my Game of Thrones? Why did you do this? Why? Why, God, why? I don't think Green Ronin really expected anyone to hit ranks 5 and 6. By their descriptions, 4 and 5 describe the best of your, like, regional realm, and 6 and 7 are, like, you're one of the best people on that entire continent, which there's, like, 2 continents, mainly, in Game of Thrones, so you're up with the elites if you're really on, like, 5 or above. The campaign book that actually lists stats for the characters from the books. The highest I've seen in combat abilities is about a 5 and maybe 3 bonus dice for a certain weapon type at most. This makes me really think this was an oversight for the core book when describing like ranks of different abilities. Or maybe initially playtesters had less experienced pools to begin with when making their characters. So I really don't know, like, it just seems like a very simple oversight that just had massive ramifications for combat. It really did become either off their armor and did like nothing, or you slashed them in half and killed them instantly. There was no really middle ground, which can be good and bad, because in combat and intrigue they're both the same. You roll over a defense stat and you try, and the more you get over that defense stat, the more degree of success you get, and thus the more damage you do, whether you're chiseling away their conviction in intrigue or cutting the man in half in combat. So yeah, it's just so easy to make a character that can destroy just about anyone in this game. And the game system just does not handle it at all. Like, there's nothing with rank 4 or 5, and I've complained too much about combat already, and yeah. So yeah, it's pretty bad, just overall. And I'll offer some more actual patches to this to actually help with combat and intrigue in just a second. The other major system, mechanical system in Song of Ice and Fire is warfare. And boy, war is hell, and doing a big battle in this system is also hell. After running about 2 campaigns, I realized warfare is geared more towards smaller conflicts, more like a minor house versus another minor house at most. In both campaigns, my players have gotten wrapped up in the War of 5 Kings. Both ended up fighting Stannis Baratheon, weirdly enough. At that grand a scale, keeping up with everything got really dumb. Let me explain how it all works, really. For each unit in an army to take an action, the acting commander must roll a warfare test to see if his order reaches the unit, and if they have the discipline to follow through with that order. Each commander takes turns ordering units each side, so side A, side B, side A, side B. Each commander can issue as many orders as he has ranks in warfare. So if one commander has 6 warfare and another commander has 3, the one with the 6, after going back and forth for 3, he then takes another 3 orders without the other side actually being able to react. But that's not really the real headache here. Each time you order a unit, their discipline increases. Thus, the more you move one unit around, the harder it is to control. This is really bad in small-scale battles when you have just a handful of units, but having a lot of units and not a high enough warfare rank leaves units sitting on their asses the entire battle, especially if there's a lot of ground to cover to then get to the other side of the fight. Even on small scales, warfare is okay, but not at all intended for like total war. I say keep battles to about 6 or 7 units max, if possible. This works really well. This worked really well in my last campaign, where we fought another minor house at one point. Then, when the War of Five Kings actually started, the first fight we had, I had my player's military defend one of 3 mountain passes from an invasion, and their allies were on the other 2 passes. Thus, I really didn't need to have to play out the other 2 battles, really, and just pretty much focus just on my player's house and their military acting in their mountain pass. So that's one way to kind of like divide it up if like there's multiple houses teaming up against something else. So that might be something to keep in mind. For my final thoughts overall, I think the Song of Ice and Fire role-playing game is a good system for those who don't want a lot of magic, or magic at all, and want a more realistic medieval RPG. Excuse me. If you don't want magic but want political intrigue to kind of replace it, and very deadly realistic combat, this is the system for you. I can easily see myself using this system for like a historical, actual like real world historical thing, like a Rome campaign or a Greece campaign, and of course the many time periods and places within medieval Europe. House creation and character creation are both fun and easy while giving players the right amount of variety without overwhelming them very much. I think creating characters and creating houses is probably the most fun with this system. Funny enough, it's all at the front end. To help solve the issues with combat, intrigue, and warfare, the combat intrigue systems, to stop them from becoming just jerk circles of stupid successes, I suggest limiting the max rank to 5 instead of 7. This gives characters more experience to use elsewhere to make more well-rounded characters, and helps, of course, the DM from having to build encounters around a 1 or 2 min-max characters. Also, keeping the scope of the campaign to a smaller region will help get things more intimate, while also keeping warfare to an ideal scale. Getting your players wrapped up in the War of the Five Kings and getting to know all those characters from the novels and the show is really tempting and is good. Like, I enjoyed it when I was doing it, but it's also just a lot to take into account. A lot of NPCs, a lot of warfare and faction and war and political intrigue. So it can be a bit much, but some of the modules I'm actually about to go over, they're set around this time, if not before the War of the Five Kings. So they're like a good middle ground of lower stakes, but also having more pretty much the current history up to date in your campaign for Game of Thrones. So yeah, I think overall the game is good. It just has some problems. That's about pretty much every system does. Every system has problems. This ones are a lot easier to find than others, but I think overall it's a good system. Alright, so if you were just here for the review, you're free to go. Go ahead. There's not much else for you here, unless you're interested in the 4 modules I'm about to go over. These are pretty much all the ones they've released for the Game of Thrones RPG line, so there will be spoilers ahead. If you think you're going to be playing in any of these things, I'd go ahead and skip this, but if you're DMing any of these, this is the place to be. So the first one is Peril at King's Landing, and my god, if there's one module I've run the most in my RPG career, it's this one. I've ran it about 3 times now with tweaks to it to fit each campaign it was in. This is a fun one that gets you straight to the capital of Westeros and deep into some intrigue against your very own house. It ends up feeling like Romance of the Three Kingdoms, except just 3 noble houses instead, but you just don't know who the third house in the mix is. The setup and plot lines meld really well together, but the main strands can be a bit hard for a new DM to wrap your head around. Like I had to reread it many times to finally cement what it was exactly each character does. Oh, is this character integral to the main plot, etc. There's a lot of characters in this module, including big names from the novels that you can rub shoulders with, which is fun. Compared to the other modules, this is the second biggest one, and can last a good 3 to 4 sessions depending on how many characters you throw at your players and how long you want to protract things, stretch it out. Words are hard. Peril at King's Landing is written in a way that makes the evil antagonistic chess master behind the scenes very hard to catch. This is very Game of Thrones-like and fits very well with the setting, but translating that to a tabletop RPG with a DM and players and all those expectations, it can get really frustrating that he ultimately wins pretty much no matter what the characters do. It's a very much the villain is planned out so well that no matter what your party does, it's like he wins pretty much anyway, unless you really pull something out of his butt. The book does supplement some post Peril at King's Landing ideas, continue the story, so you can eventually get the bad guy that was behind everything, which I did in my most recent one, and that was quite satisfying for my party. Besides that criticism, Peril at King's Landing doesn't expect you to go up and talk to the second house that your house has been framed against, because the third one is making you and this other pretty much bystander house kind of enemies of each other. But none of my players really talked to the second house until my most recent campaign. The second house, on your way to the capital, has been bad-mouthing the players and been giving them a bad rep while on to the capital, and because of that, the book doesn't really expect you to just go up to him and just be pretty much level with him. It's just, I guess it's just so straightforward and down to earth. The writers, I guess, just weren't expecting it. I also was not expecting it, just because I've done it so many times and just expected the players to be like, yo, fuck these guys. So it was very oh, just going to talk to them like civil human beings. Weird. Another criticism is the players, again, are given very few clues about the big finale at the end, which it is, again, admittedly very Game of Thrones-like, but the trial by combat at the end feels quite forced, just because the characters are given so few clues to go off of. That's pretty much my word versus their word, and now we're just going to fight over it. So, overall, I think this is a pretty good module. I really like it. I've run it 3 times, so I do like it. It's just, expect your characters to get really frustrated. Expect your players to get really frustrated, at the end, pretty much. But you could also feed off that and make it a very satisfying sequel-like adventure to get the baddie, now that you, like, discover him later. So, the next module I have is Chronicle Starter, and the contents of this one are threefold. One, you get a section of pre-generated houses, about half a dozen or so, complete with resources and characters already made and written. You get a a lore book on the Riverlands with interesting locations and festivals within it. And finally, you get an intro adventure centered around these pre-generated houses and the Ironborn. Here are two things you need to be aware before getting the Chronicle Starter. One is all these pre-gens are in the Riverlands, and in my opinion, the Riverlands is one of the most boring realms within Westeros. It is central to the continent and is the breadbasket of the Seven Kingdoms, but for some reason it never really grooved with me like the other realms do. The pre-gens themselves are pretty nice, and can be used as just take them and use them as fodder for other neighbors and other campaigns. And they're all relatively interesting. What kind of irks me about these ones is, despite all of them being in the Riverlands, not all of them swear allegiance to the Liege Lord of the Riverlands. So all the houses are related to the great houses that fought for and won with Robert's Rebellion. But I just have a hard time thinking they'd all be okay with having different stakes in the Riverlands, even if they are all buddies with each other. This also kind of shits on anyone who wants to have a house that used to be with the Targaryens before Robert's Rebellion. So if you want to be anyone who is aligned with them, you're pretty much SOL as far as this book is concerned. The actual module bit of the Chronicle Starter is based on the Ironborn from the Iron Islands, trying to destabilize houses to better raid them. There are branching paths to them, which can be both used one after another. There's like two, technically, modules in here, but one could then lead to the other, and they're both linked by the Ironborn messing around with people. But luckily, they're both relatively simple things. First time DMs of the Song of Ice and Fire roleplay, I would recommend you're much better off here than in Peril at King's Landing. Just right off the bat, everything is just right there for you. It's much more an introductory thing than Peril at King's Landing. As much as I love it, it's still not the best thing to run for first timers. For criticisms of the actual Chronicle Starter as a whole, I really don't have too many. It's a super useful book with pre-made houses and characters, so there's really nothing bad to do with that. If you're looking for houses based in the Iron Isles, Dorne, or the North, the ones presented here would not fit very well within those three, just because their cultures are just so much more different from all the other kingdoms. But that in of itself can be a way to add tension to a campaign if you want to, like, insert a more mainstream house into a place that's where it's not mainstream. So there is that. But overall, I think this is a really good module. It's a really good just like book on Song of Ice and Fire role-playing, and I highly suggest it. It's really nice. Okay, so the next module I have is Wedding Night, and I got it with the Narrator's Kit from the Green Ronin website. The Narrator's Kit is a handy little thing. It's pretty much it's a DM screen, some quick reference handouts for combat, and they're also dry erase trackers for the different combats and everything to keep track of in the game. It's very handy, and if you're going to get Wedding Night, I feel you might as well get the Narrator's Kit, because the Wedding Night comes with a Narrator's Kit for free. And it's also, I think it's the only way to get a printed version of Wedding Night. There's about $20 difference on the Green Ronin site, just because, well, the PDF is like $4 or $5 maybe. and then the narrator's kit's like 20, 25. So if you're wanting to get the two at some point, you might as well just get the kit, and then you also just get the module for free as well. But that's if you're really into this system, and you know you're going to use the actual like DM screen and whatnot. But anyway, the actual premise of Wedding Night is simple enough. Two families who hate each other coming together through marriage to end their rivalry. Classic tale. Of course, not everyone is okay with this arrangement, and it wouldn't be Game of Thrones if someone didn't have a deep dark secret that they're hiding. The module has two ways to play this, it proposes. One is to simply take the characters from the two families that are getting married and play as them. Their stats are already rolled up and everything, and they're ready to go. This approach is good for a one-shot, like a convention, or, oh hey, let's just try this system out, and not like bother with actually going through character creation. The second way to play this is to have the player house, be invited as a guest to the wedding or host the wedding to help kind of diffuse tensions between the two marrying houses. This option is suited well for longer campaigns, because you've already made your own house and it's rather introductory as well. And it's suggested the marrying families also be your neighbors in wherever you set your house. So, you can reap all the benefits and the consequences of what happens from this wedding. The flow is quite simple. Party arrives at the site of the wedding, or they're already there, and the guests arrive. They're entertained over the days leading up to the wedding. There's a hunt, there's some dancing, there's a little bit of intrigue when the bride to be, has a scene where she can reveal her deep dark secret. And of course, once this dark secret is revealed to one player or multiple players, depending on who kind of like sleuths after her, things can get real dramatic. You can just, of course, do the old cliche of revealing the truth before the bride and groom say "I do." I know, real classic, but I highly recommend Wedding Night if you're interested in Song of Ice and Fire roleplay. Gosh, this whole adventure should not be. It can be one long session of like 4 to 5 hours, maybe, or like two really short ones. It's a very short thing to do, and it's very self-contained. It's very well written, if a bit cliche, but that's okay. It has a lot of good pre-made characters and the two families that are getting married are relatively fleshed out, so that's just another two houses that you can build on if you want. It's a really good deal if you don't want to drop just the whole like 50 on the core book, but you really want to try this system out and try it and see if you like it before you like commit all that money financially. So I think overall this is a really good module as well. I just like all these modules, I've realized. Yeah, it's good. The last module I have is also the biggest of the bunch. It's called the Dragon's Hoard, and it's about 175 pages long. This is a rather strange one for Song of Ice and Fire. It's really globe trekking. You go outside of your house lands quite a bit, and it has a lot of D&D vibes, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just a little weirder for this setting specifically. The plot for it is simple, but the steps to complete the module are complex. Basically, a bastard with the knowledge of the Dragon's Hoard comes to your house and is being hunted down by another house. This other house pretty much attacks you without any real reason, and is trying to get that bastard, but they fail. They're going to try again, but the bastard promises information on the Dragon Sword if you give him protection. So you then start a rat race across Westeros and a little bit of Essos as well. Some locales that are included in this are a wedding tournament, the streets of Bravos, going back home and finding an old Targaryen loyalist there, and then finally a trap-filled dungeon underneath an island full of pirates. That one's a little much, even for Song of Ice and Fire, but it's really fun. There is the dungeon is it's rather small, but it very much reminds me of like really classic kind of like D&D dungeon crawl. This module was released in 2016, about almost 3 years ago at this point of this recording, and it's been, at that time, it was about 7 years after they released Song of Ice and Fire role-playing. So I thought it was kind of weird that they came out with this really big adventure so much later, after any sort of like hype for the game has kind of died. The show, of course, kind of revitalizes interest in Game of Thrones every year or so when a season ends, and that leading up to another season, especially now with season 8 coming up. But overall, this is a really fun adventure module. If you really just want a change of pace, this is the one to do it with. You go to Bravos, you go to the wedding tournaments around the Crown Lands, which might or might not be a different place for you, depending on where your house lands are. Otherwise, I've not actually played this one myself, but I just had to do the dungeon, the vault, where the Dragon Sword is actually kept, is called. The vault was really fun. I really liked that bit. I wish there was a bit more to it, but having, honestly, a dungeon crawl in D&D was actually a lot more fun than I thought it would be, and it was also kind of like that sweet spot of, it was just right, short but sweet kind of deal, you know? But overall, those are my reviews for the modules. Definitely Narrator's Kit, or the Chronicle Starter, and the Wedding Night ones are definitely two I would recommend for first-time DMs. I think I put an edit in the video for earlier, but those two, sadly, you do need to have the rules for a Song of Ice and Fire roleplay to actually play them and actually know what to do. Otherwise, they do have characters ready for you. You just wouldn't know what to do with the numbers exactly. But the rules are fairly simple enough, and honestly, I'm sure you could find them online somewhere. Don't know where. But yeah. Yeah. Song of Ice and Fire roleplay. It's got problems, but I don't think my ideas to like fix it will probably be like the end-all be-all remedy for the system, but I think it's a good step in the right direction. But yeah. Have a good day, everybody, and thank you for your time.